Starting from around 550 BC, Cyrus the Great becomes king of the Persians, a nomadic Iranian-speaking tribe. At this point, his world is ruled by the major kingdoms of the Babylonians, Lydians, and Medians. Cyrus sets out to conquer various lands in Asia. First Media, then Lydia and Asia Minor, and then Babylon. Scholars are divided as to whether he or Darius allows the Babylonian Jews to return from their exile. This marks the beginning of the Achaemenid Empire. After Cyrus dies in 530 BC, his son Cambyses ascends the throne, adding Egypt to the empire. He dies suspiciously in 522 BC, and after a brief civil war, Darius I emerges securely as king. Darius spends the rest of the century securing control of Egypt, the Indus Valley, Babylon, and Central Asia. He carries out many administrative and economic reforms that will set the shape of the Achaemenid Empire for the next few centuries. The Ionian Revolt breaks out in 499 BC, led by the Greeks in Asia Minor against Persian rule. This is quashed in 493 BC, but Athenian involvement in the revolt gives Darius an excuse to invade Greece in 490 BC. This is defeated at the Battle of Marathon in the same year. Shortly afterward, Egypt revolts, and while Darius fails to crush this, he dies in 486 BC while preparing to do so. His son Xerxes I reestablishes control of Egypt, then launches a second invasion of Greece in 480 BC. This soon flounders, and a year later, the remnants of the invasion force are defeated at the Battle of Plataea, forcing the Persians to withdraw. Xerxes, who had returned to Asia in 480 BC after hearing that Babylon was in revolt, spends the rest of his reign building up the empire, completing a number of major construction projects and repairing royal roads. He also, somewhat unsuccessfully, defends the northwest territories from Greek counterattacks following the withdrawal from Greece. These step up with the formation of the Delian League, which spends the next 30-odd years campaigning against Persian strongholds in the Aegean, Egypt, and Thrace. The Persians suffer a crushing defeat at the Battle of Eurymedon in either 469 or 466 BC. Xerxes is murdered in 465 BC by royal guards commander Artabanus. He in turn is murdered shortly afterward by Xerxes' son Artaxerxes I, who ascends the throne in the same year. Artaxerxes oversees further defense of the empire against invading Delian League forces, with some serious incursions into Egypt and Cyprus, which are finally driven away around 450 BC, allowing a lull in overt Greco-Persian hostilities. Artaxerxes' reign is marked by further help of the Jews, as well as a number of construction projects. He also gives strong support to the Zoroastrian religion, as well as playing off Athens and Sparta against each other in the Peloponnesian War. Artaxerxes I dies in 424 BC, leaving the throne to his son Xerxes II. He is murdered a month later by his brother Sogdianus, who in turn is murdered shortly afterward by his brother Ochus after a brief civil war. Ochus ascends the throne in 423 BC and changes his name to Darius II. Darius II's reign is marked by further meddling in the Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta both want Persian money, while the Persians want Greek fleets to protect their weakened Aegean holdings. The situation is further destabilized by the constant bickering of Persian governors in the northwest territories, who court the Greek city-states to strengthen their own positions. Events in the rest of the empire are not well known, though possibly there were revolts in Egypt and Media toward the end of the century. As the Peloponnesian War draws to a close, the Persians overtly support Sparta against Athens. Darius II dies in 405 BC, and the throne goes to his elder son Artaxerxes II. Shortly afterward, Egypt revolts successfully, seceding for the next 60-odd years. Artaxerxes II's brother, Cyrus the Younger, tries to seize the throne with the help of a large force of Greek mercenaries under the Spartan Clearchus. Cyrus is killed at the Battle of Cunaxa, and the mercenaries under the Athenian Xenophon retreat back to Greece. Artaxerxes II's reign is the longest of all the Achaemenid kings, marked by further construction projects, particularly of Zoroastrian sites. His reign, however, is also marked by prolonged trouble with the Egyptian territories, with various attempts at reconquest rebuffed by local forces. For the next nearly 60 years, a series of minor pharaohs rule various parts of Egypt in defiance of Persian rule. The Egyptian conflict involves a great number of Greek mercenaries serving on both sides. In 396 BC, Spartan king Agesilaus II launches a major raid on the Asia Minor territories, in response to pleas by those Ionians who'd sided with Cyrus the Younger and now fear the new governor installed by Artaxerxes. Agesilaus sees some success, but is recalled in 394 BC. Part of the Persian strategy to drive away Agesilaus is to subsidize Sparta's enemies. This comes to a head in the Corinthian War, in which the Persians again place Sparta and Athens off against each other with nearly disastrous consequences. The war ends in a treaty limiting Persian influence to the Greek cities in Asia Minor and Cyprus, but still demonstrates the Persians' ability to influence events in Greece. Between 372 to 62 BC, Artaxerxes also faces the so-called satraps' revolt, which sees the governors of Cappadocia, Phrygia, and Armenia revolt. Artaxerxes restores control of the satrapies by 362 BC. He dies in 359 BC, leaving the throne to his son Artaxerxes III. There is evidence that Artaxerxes III had engineered the deaths of several of his competitors for the throne even before he ascended it. The start of his reign is marked by a massacre of most of his male relatives to secure his position. The start of Artaxerxes III's reign is also marked by successful campaigns against a revolt in Media. In the same year, he also orders the disbanding of all satrapal armies in Asia Minor, which had become more of a liability than a safeguard. This order is disobeyed by the satrap of Lydia, who manages to hold out for 2 years with Athenian help, even defeating a loyalist force in 354 BC. By 353 BC, imperial control of Asia Minor is restored. In 351 BC, major revolts flare up in Cyprus and Sidon. Both are put down with great difficulty by 343 BC. Egyptian support of the Sidonians prompts renewed efforts to retake Egypt, which since 398 BC had been ruled by a series of native pharaohs, though none of them ruled a unified Egypt. Artaxerxes fully retakes Egypt in 342 BC, deposing Pharaoh Nectanebo II, the last native pharaoh of Egypt. Artaxerxes' reign also sees somewhat frosty relations between Persia and Macedon. While at first peaceful, relations sour when the Macedonians under Philip II attack the strategic town of Perinthus. In 340 BC, Artaxerxes responds by deploying forces to relieve Perinthus and to support Thrace, forcing Philip to withdraw. In 338 BC, Artaxerxes is murdered by Bagoas, a general who'd fallen out of favor with the king. Artaxerxes' son Arses ascends the throne, reigning as a puppet king until 336 BC, when he too is murdered by Bagoas. In the same year, Darius III is raised by Bagoas to the throne, and he finally manages to kill the wily old officer. Shortly afterward, a revolt flares up in Egypt led by Kabash and is put down in 334 BC. That same year, Alexander the Great invades Asia Minor, defeating a Persian force at the Battle of the Granicus. Darius responds by sponsoring anti-Macedonian factions in Greece, and while these efforts see Sparta rise up against Macedon, the revolt is ultimately put down in 331 BC. The Persians are defeated again and again at the battles of Issus and Gaugamela, and lose Egypt for the last time in 332 BC to Alexander's forces. In 330 BC, Alexander manages to seize Persepolis, forcing Darius to flee eastward, first to Ecbatana and then Bactria. The satrap of Bactria, Bessus, launches a coup against Darius, who is murdered shortly afterward. Bessus crowns himself Artaxerxes V and tries to raise another army to drive out Alexander, but his own men, fearing Alexander's approach, seize him and surrender him to the Macedonians in 329 BC. This marks the end of the Achaemenid Empire. The empire's territory is ruled by Alexander's regents until his death in 323 BC. After a protracted and bloody power struggle, Seleucus, one of Alexander's generals, establishes firm control of Babylon in 312 BC. By 300 BC, his new Seleucid Empire is in control of Mesopotamia, Iran, Sogdia, Bactria, and Parthia, as well as the newly conquered territories of Anatolia and northern Syria. In other words, much of the old Achaemenid domain. A couple of things to note about all this. You've probably noticed that this video focused a lot on events around the Eastern Mediterranean and not much on the rest of the empire. That's no accident, since most of what we know about Achaemenid Persian history comes from the Greek sources. The Persians, as far as we know, didn't write down their own history, or if they did, we've lost all traces of it. That means two things for students of Persian history. Firstly, the Greeks, naturally, focused on events in their world, so we just don't know much about events in the empire outside of the Eastern Mediterranean. Secondly, we have to account for a lot of bias, since a lot of the Greek sources are not neutral about the Persians, besides getting a few things wrong since they were writing about a foreign culture. But that just makes studying Achaemenid Persian history all the more interesting. It's like reading someone's handwriting in a mirror. You often have to work backward, sifting what's useful from what's not useful, and doing a lot of reading between the lines. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check us out on Patreon and Redbubble on the links below. That's it for now. See you guys next time.